And in this video, we're going to take a look at activities post the murders of Abigail Williams and Liberty German, mainly focusing on the cell phone which was later recovered by the police. So this is a topic that I've given quite a lot of consideration over the last couple of weeks. We have this cell phone, Liberty German cell phone, which records a man walking towards the girls on the Monon High Bridge. There's also a voice recorded on the same cell phone, yet the perpetrator or perpetrators of this crime do not take that cell phone after the murders have been committed. Now, many people will say, well, the killer may have been in a rush, he may not have had the time to search the bodies and discard the evidence or try to destroy it, etc. Or maybe he simply couldn't find that cell phone. Now, when we take a look at the balance of probability concerning these two young girls and the man who you see in front of you here walking towards them, surely if this individual had contacted or had communication with the girls prior to these murders, then there's every possibility that A, they're going to have one of their cell phones on them, B, the police may well obtain that information, it may well link back to the perpetrator of the crime. Surely this must have been a concern for whoever committed these murders. So does this tell us that the man who we actually see in front of us here was not one of the individuals who was actually communicating with the girls prior to the murders taking place? So when we take a closer look at the cell phone of Liberty German, by all accounts this phone was discovered close to the location of the bodies. I haven't heard any mention of that phone trying to be destroyed. It wasn't found miles and miles away from the girl's location. Now, many people, as I say, will argue that maybe the killer didn't have enough time. Maybe he just simply committed this crime and, made good his escape. But that doesn't appear to be the case, particularly in the recently released document. Now, in that document, it mentioned that the girls' bodies had been moved and staged, and also that items of clothing were also taken by the perpetrator. The very fact that those activities took place post the murders tells us that there at least existed a certain window of time, a window of opportunity for that killer to actually indulge in those very activities. It's not as if he simply killed these individuals and made a run for it. He's had time. There's been time to remove items of clothing, time to stage the bodies, time to make the crime scene appear in a certain way. Yet the cell phone of Liberty German remains very close to the bodies. Now let's put ourselves in the mind of the perpetrator for one moment. Let's just assume that he in fact had orchestrated everything on his own. This is an individual who has committed these murders. He has catfished the girls or communicated with the girls leading up to the murders. He's lured them to the Monon High Bridge. Surely, in your mind, very high on the top of priorities, would be trying to recover the cell phone of Liberty German or one of the girls who you had been speaking to. But that just doesn't appear to be the case. If I had to guess, and this is obviously based on the information that we've had released over the last few months, my best guesstimate regarding the Delphi murders would be that Keegan and Tony Klein are involved, but they're out on the fringes. They facilitated this meet, but the individual that we see walking towards the girls did not have any prior communication with them. Now, if there is some truth in what I have just said there, that would go to explain why the cell phone was found relatively easy, relatively close to the bodies, because if he hasn't had any prior communication with the girls, there's nothing really on that phone that he knows of, bearing in mind he's probably not aware that he's actually being videoed and his voice is on that actual phone. But in his mind, there's nothing on that device which could potentially lead directly back to him. And maybe this guy is actually a little bit more forensically aware, at least in terms of electronics, than, say, Tony and Keegan Klein. I mean, when we look at the way they actually held on to their devices, they didn't use the darknet. Everything that they seemed to do seemed to be carried out on the open web, searches on Google, all that sort of stuff. There doesn't really seem to be any subtlety in terms of how they have carried out their heinous, sick acts. But the individual that we see on the bridge could be a completely different beast, so to speak. Is this someone who has quite a lot of experience with the deep web, the dark net? Was he using some kind of messaging device, something where he felt that his privacy was quite well protected? Is that why the phone of Liberty German seemingly was not important to this killer? He didn't want to risk destroying it or taking it with him, because he's a little bit more forensically aware than, as I say, someone like Keegan Kline. Now, for a lot of people, Keegan Kline is their number one person of interest. But what I would say to that is look at what happened after the murders had taken place. If you had had some real direct connection, some physical connection to this crime, why would you keep hold of incriminating evidence after the murders? Why would you keep hold of your mobile phones, which the police could come and take a look at? They could trace the messages back. Surely those devices would be one of the first few things that you destroyed post the murders. Not only that, but the web searches, which were conducted, as I say, out on the open web, looking for details of the Delphi investigation, Googling terms such as how long does DNA last on a body. To me, it's fairly evident that there is still a very large missing piece in the puzzle of the Delphi murders. Every bit of circumstantial evidence, even back to the transcripts concerning Keegan Kline and his police interview, the vibe that I get from all of this is that there is a strong level of involvement in terms of Keegan Kline, potentially even Tony Kline, his father. But there's still a massive piece of the puzzle which is missing here. Does that explain why we don't really appear to be, and I use the word appear because the police aren't exactly forthcoming with information on this crime? Is that why it appears that nothing is actually happening? Because police are still trying to search for and locate the biggest piece of the puzzle. Another reason that I say that is because if this killer had indeed behaved in the same way that Keegan Kline did post-murders, as in keeping devices, as in not hiding his identity, as in flaunting his illegal activities out on the open web, if this individual had those same characteristics, then we have to ask ourselves, why has this case not been solved? Why have no arrests been made? The only way that I can explain that, and the only way that I can, I guess, give some leeway to law enforcement at this point in time, bearing in mind we're now in 2022, is that this individual was not on the law enforcement database. They were not on any law enforcement radar. They were someone who was a little bit more savvy in terms of hiding their identity. Someone who was potentially part of a group of people. But not everybody who surrounded Keegan Kline, from what I can tell, behaved in the same way that he did. So carefree, so confident, so lazy in protecting his identity and protecting his crimes. One thing that I do believe, before we close today's video, is that Keegan Kline had a certain level of involvement in this crime. I believe he was a facilitator of this crime. I believe he knows exactly what took place on that fateful day. Could it be that Keegan Kline himself doesn't actually know the true identity of the man you see before you? Was this man, as I said earlier, a little bit more experienced in terms of hiding his own identity? Was Keegan Kline's role in the murders to simply facilitate the meeting for that day? And that is in fact why we have the suspicious activity regarding his cell phones and his search history which were conducted post the murders. Is that why he was Googling the Sandy Hook victims, the bodies of those poor children? Is that why he was searching that? Because in his sick curiosity, he wanted to see what this killer had done or what that scene would have looked like. That's the impression that I get in my mind when I saw, or I should say when I read that part of the Keegan-Klein transcript. Was that what it was all about? Some sort of sick curiosity in terms of how the crime scene may have looked? Everything that I've read points to, as I say, a level of involvement, but possibly not a direct physical connection there between Keegan-Klein and the deaths of Liberty German and Abigail Williams. Many thanks for joining me for today's video. Very shortly on your screen you'll be able to see some other videos from the channel, including the Delphi Murders playlist, which has all of the videos concerning this case in one convenient folder. Many thanks for joining me for today's video. I look forward to seeing you all again for the next one. Take care. Cheers.